They thought she was just a black waitress, quietly pouring water and clearing tables beneath the glow of crystal chandeliers. But when a one-year-old boy, his legs bound tightly by metal braces, suddenly reached out his hand to invite her to dance, everything stopped. The manager shouted. The boy's father, a single millionaire, barked out an order, and every fork, every glass of wine froze midair. No one could have imagined that this small decision would open up a story powerful enough to change the fate of a child, a father, and even an entire community. His name was Caleb Harrington, 11 years old, his face pale under the warm golden glow of the crystal chandeliers. His eyes locked onto one person in the room, the only one who didn't pretend he didn't exist. That was Aaliyah Brooks, the only black waitress in the restaurant, gliding silently between tables with a silver tray in her hand, her steps instinctively avoiding the stairs and heavy chairs, as if it were second nature. When Caleb's small, trembling hand reached out toward her, Aaliyah stopped. The piano still played softly, but a sharp voice sliced through the air. The restaurant manager, a towering man whose smile was reserved for those with money, and whose tone was for everyone else. This is not a dance floor, and you are not here for entertainment. His words cracked across the room like a whip, making even the innocent diners feel as though they had just been caught in the act. At the table near the window, Daniel Harrington, real estate millionaire and Caleb's father, froze mid-motion. His fork hung suspended in the air, jaw clenched tight. This was the first time he had brought his son out in public since the accident that had bound the boy's legs in metal braces. And now, his son was doing the one thing no one dared to imagine. "Sit down, Caleb." Daniel's voice was deep, clipped in order. He expected the boy to obey, to end this humiliating scene. But Caleb did not withdraw his hand, and Aaliyah did not turn away. She slipped a note into her pocket, unfastened her apron, folded it neatly, and laid it on the tray. "My shift is over." Her tone was steady, but the gentle look in her eyes as she bent down toward Caleb was like a quiet reassurance. Her smile was not the mechanical politeness of service, but warm, personal. "I can't dance while still wearing an apron." The room stirred with shock. Daniel faltered, stunned as he watched his son's hand being taken. The manager opened his mouth to object, but was struck silent. The pianist, attuned to the heartbeat of the room, kept playing, yet now the melody belonged to this moment. Caleb lifted his foot. One hesitant step, the metal brace scraping against the polished tiles, producing a harsh, dry creak. Every gaze converged on him, but Aaliyah did not rush him, did not lead. She let the boy decide every step for himself. "All right then, my dear audience, stay tuned for a story that will make you marvel. Take a second to like the video and subscribe, but only if you truly connect with what I'm sharing here. And don't forget to leave a comment below to tell me where you're watching from and what time it is for you. It's always fascinating to see people joining us from all over the world." Daniel Harrington rarely initiated meetings with people he considered outside his world. Yet that morning, he had his assistant summon Aaliyah Brooks to the top-floor office of Harrington Tower. No small talk, no polite greetings. He looked straight at her and got right to the point. He wanted to know who she was, her education, and why she had appeared the night before in a situation that made the entire restaurant stop. His voice was cold and terse, as if every question was a command. Daniel had no interest in the story of a waitress. He wanted control over every detail surrounding his son, and the woman standing before him was an unexpected piece in the puzzle. Aaliyah did not avoid him. She explained that outside her work at the restaurant, she had studied child development and was currently running a small program with her sister called Step Forward, where children with disabilities learn to dance to improve their health and confidence. Her tone was steady, her gaze unwavering even as she faced a man notorious for his coldness and pragmatism. Daniel listened without nodding or shaking his head, silent for a moment before making a blunt proposal. "You will work for me. As a therapeutic companion for Caleb, I will pay you 10 times what you earn at the restaurant." To him, that was the fastest way to solve a problem, turn it into a transaction. In that moment, the room grew heavy, waiting for an answer. Aaliyah looked at him, then at the photo of Caleb on the desk. The boy's face revealed both fragility and a yearning to live a normal life. She understood that this offer would change her life, but she also recognized it as merely another extension of Daniel's habit of control. Placing her hand on the table, her voice calm, she said, "I don't sell care. Your son needs something more real than what money can buy." Before Daniel could respond, Aaliyah pulled a small card from her wallet bearing a turquoise footprint logo. "Step forward. Tuesdays and Thursdays, 4 o'clock. The first session is free. If you want, bring Caleb. If not, that's fine." Daniel's brow furrowed. He was not used to being refused, especially not by someone he regarded as beneath him. He could have ended it right then, but in that instant, the memory of Caleb's eyes from the night before came rushing back the way they lit up when he held Aaliyah's hand. It was nothing like the sullen look Caleb usually wore in his presence. Aaliyah said nothing more. She simply stood, left the card on the desk, and walked out of the office. Her steps were calm, as if refusing a millionaire did not frighten her at all. The door closed, leaving Daniel alone with the small card heavier than any contract he had ever signed. He could throw it away. He could continue believing that money bought every solution. But that thought rang hollow as the image of Caleb filled his mind. A child who needed not just therapy, but someone who believed in his ability. Sitting quietly by the window, Daniel turned the card over in his hand, his finger unconsciously tracing the turquoise footprint. He hated hesitation, yet this time he could not deny it. One question echoed inside him more persistently than any music played the night before. Could the woman who had just walked out of this room truly hold the key to Caleb's future? That afternoon, the glass doors of Step Forward opened, and Caleb stepped for the first time into a space his father had never imagined setting foot in. There were no dazzling crystal chandeliers, no staff bowing in greeting, just a wide room, mirrors running along the walls, and pale wooden floors reflecting the afternoon sunlight. Yet it was precisely this simplicity that made everything feel unfamiliar. A place that did not define people by the money they had, but by their steps, clumsy though they might be, each carrying its own value. Caleb walked slowly, the braces on his legs creaking steadily, his shoulders tensing as he realized he wasn't alone in the room. A group of children was already practicing, some in wheelchairs, some wearing braces like him. All of them moved in circles to the gentle music, slow but steady. No one looked at Caleb with pity. That was what surprised him most. Aaliyah appeared from the far end of the room, her face radiant not with the severity of an instructor, but with the belief of someone who trusted. She handed Caleb a pair of soft shoes, specially designed for children with disabilities, then gestured lightly toward the group of kids. No orders, no pressure, just an invitation through her eyes. Daniel stood near the door, hands in his pockets, his cold gaze sweeping over the room. In his mind, every detail broke down like a spreadsheet. Old mirrors, wooden floors lacking shine, outdated speakers. To him, this place was nothing more than a makeshift studio. Yet what unsettled him more was the look on Caleb's face, wide-eyed, eager an expression he hadn't seen since the accident. The music swelled, its melody like slow breathing. A boy in a wheelchair reached out his hand, and the child beside him took it, swaying together to the rhythm. Caleb stood still, lips pressed tight, his legs stiff. Daniel wanted to pull him out, to end this nonsense, but something kept him rooted in place. Aaliyah stepped closer, not touching Caleb, but moving gently alongside him, letting him feel he was not alone. Caleb glanced at his father for a moment, then drew in a deep breath. His legs trembled, but this time he lifted them himself. 1, 2. The braces scraped against the polished floor, the sound grating and harsh against the music. But no one stopped. Instead, the other children clapped softly to the rhythm, cheering with looks full of understanding. Caleb took another step, then another. Sweat beaded across his forehead, but his eyes grew brighter. In the mirror, he no longer saw a child imprisoned in metal, but a boy learning to dance in his own way. Daniel stood frozen. He remembered the night at the restaurant, when the entire room held its breath watching Caleb and Aaliyah. Now, there were no luxurious lights, no distant spectators, only the persistence of children society often overlooked. And for the first time he felt that money could not buy the transformation unfolding before his eyes. When the music ended, Caleb sat down, breathless, but with a smile tugging at the corners of his lips. It was not a smile to please anyone, but a true smile, the kind that had vanished since the accident. Daniel saw it, yet did not step forward, did not praise. He simply stood still, and in his chest, a strange feeling spread. Helplessness mingled with hope. Aaliyah placed a gentle hand on Caleb's shoulder, whispering something only the two of them could hear. He nodded, then looked toward his father, as if asking, "Will you stay next time?" Daniel didn't answer. He only clenched his fist in his pocket. But as he turned toward the door, he knew he would not throw away the step-forward card. Perhaps this was the place his son truly needed. Do you think you can guess what will happen next? Take a moment to relax and drop a comment with the number 1, or say, "I'm still here," to keep listening. Daniel Montgomery had never believed in places like Step Forward. In his world, every problem could be solved with money, power, or contracts signed under crystal chandeliers. But that evening, after returning from the center, he realized that numbers and charts on a screen could never erase the image of Caleb, walking, trembling, yet full of determination. For the first time in years, he felt an emptiness inside him, something no fortune could fill. The next day, Daniel returned to Step Forward, not to accompany his son, but to observe. He stood in a corner, his polished leather shoes reflecting the light on the worn wooden floor. Inside the circle, the children turned, swaying gently to the music. Caleb blended in, awkward but persistent, while Aaliyah kept the rhythm for him. Daniel realized he was the outsider in the very world where his son was finding a place to belong. One moment held his gaze. A boy slipped from his wheelchair. Instead of panic, the children immediately reached out to lift their friend back up, laughter ringing out instead of tears. Daniel shuddered involuntarily throughout the years. He had only taught Caleb to rise from failure with coldness and severity. Here, the children taught each other to rise through open arms. When the session ended, Daniel was about to turn away, but Aaliyah approached, handing him a pair of old practice shoes. No explanation, just a look. He almost scoffed, but then he noticed Caleb watching him, eyes filled with hope. Daniel took the shoes, heavy in his hands not because of their weight, but because of the challenge he had never imagined facing. The following day, he no longer stood apart. When the music began, Daniel awkwardly stepped into the circle, among children sometimes even weaker than Caleb. His first steps were clumsy, awkward, as though every habit of power had been stripped away. But when Caleb came to his side, taking his hand, Daniel realized there were rhythms one could only learn by lowering oneself to meet others at eye level. He had never danced before, but music required no experience, it required presence, and for the first time, Daniel was truly present in his son's world. Caleb's laughter rang out, louder than the music, and Daniel felt that he was no longer a lonely businessman but a real father. A few sessions later, Daniel became a regular at the center. At first, he only tried a few steps, but gradually, he understood the meaning of falling and rising again. He saw his son cheered on by friends, heard the clapping of encouragement, and deep inside, he felt envy for what money could never buy. But this envy was no longer bitter, it became a motivation. He wanted to belong to this circle, not just as a spectator. When Aaliyah organized a small performance for parents and children to dance together, Daniel no longer hesitated. He put on simple practice clothes for the first time in years without a luxury suit. Next to Caleb, he turned in circles, no longer awkward but comfortable, even if his movements remained stiff. The small crowd in the room laughed, applauded, and Caleb's eyes shone like a guiding light. Daniel realized that stepping into the circle was not to teach his son anything, but to learn how to live again. Within the embrace of the music, he was no longer a lonely millionaire. He was simply a father, trying to keep in rhythm with his son. And that was what he hadn't known he had lost all along. Would Daniel dare to take another step not just into the class, but into opening his heart to Aaliyah, the woman who had transformed his son's entire world? From the day Daniel stepped into the circle of Step Forward, his relationship with Aaliyah was no longer confined to polite nods. They began to exist within the same world, a place where he could not buy respect with money, and she no longer needed to hide her resilience in order to survive. But when two people from opposite ends of society moved to the same rhythm, the invisible walls around their hearts began to crack. Daniel noticed that every time Aaliyah entered the room, the atmosphere seemed to shift. She carried no show of grandeur, only a quiet strength that made others focus and trust. To Caleb, she was a guiding hand. To Daniel, she became a mirror reflecting what he had lost: patience, kindness, and a way of loving that asked for nothing in return. Yet it was precisely this that stirred unease within him. As a single millionaire, Daniel was accustomed to relationships defined by power. In his world, intimacy rarely escaped the shadow of calculation. And yet here, before Aaliyah's gaze, he could find no formula to explain it. He saw only sincerity, and that both drew him in and made him wary. One evening, after practice, Daniel stayed behind to help Aaliyah clean. The children had gone home, the wide room was silent, broken only by footsteps and the swish of fabric across the floor. He was unaccustomed to this kind of stillness, especially when shared with a woman who could see through the armor he wore. Daniel felt awkward, like a stranger in his own story. Caleb became the invisible bridge. At home, he often spoke of Aaliyah, how she taught him balance, how she encouraged him to fall in order to learn how to stand up on his own. Each time, Daniel heard joy in his son's voice, a joy he himself had never been able to inspire, and deep inside a question lingered. Was she the one giving Caleb what he could not? Not everyone welcomed the change. At several sessions, Daniel noticed the probing eyes of other parents. To them, his presence resembled that of an outsider intruding on a space meant only for those who possessed nothing but patience. His wealth, once his shield, now became the reason for his isolation. Daniel never voiced it, but deep down, he knew his presence was accepted only because of Caleb and Aaliyah. One late night, Daniel drove through the neighborhood where Step Forward was located. Small houses stood shoulder to shoulder, golden light spilling from their windows, a world utterly unlike the luxury he inhabited. He stopped before the worn-down apartment where Aaliyah lived. Her room light still glowed, her slender figure silhouetted against the thin curtain. Daniel sat motionless, an unfamiliar feeling seeping into his chest. He was not the man she needed, only a curious outsider lingering at the door of her modest life. The next morning, Aaliyah brought news. Step Forward was preparing a public performance to raise funds for the center's survival. Caleb was beyond excited, while Daniel stayed silent. He understood this would no longer be the small circles within a closed room. This would be the moment when the outside world, the media, the watchful eyes would witness everything. And for him, that meant the risk of losing control. But when he saw Caleb's radiant smile as he clutched the performance flyer, Daniel knew he could not turn away. He looked at Aaliyah, and in her eyes there was no command, no expectation, only the trust that he would choose the right thing. Would Daniel be willing to set aside his pride and step into the public light alongside his son and Aaliyah, where no walls could shield him anymore? The performance hall that day was unlike any space Daniel had ever entered. There were no white tablecloths, no glasses of wine set neatly on tables, no VIP rows reserved for the elite. This was an old community hall, its high ceiling stained with watermarks, long rows of wooden chairs lined up, and yellow bulbs flickering from age. Yet for the children of Step Forward, this place was more than just a stage. It was their world, a place to prove they too had the right to shine. Daniel sat in the front row, his hands tightly clasped. His heart pounded as though he himself was about to step onto the stage. Caleb, dressed in simple clothes, stood behind the velvet curtain, the metal braces under his trousers clicking softly with each shift of movement. Aaliyah stood beside him, one hand on his shoulder, her eyes shining with a faith more powerful than 1,000 words of encouragement. When the spotlight came on and the music began, the hall fell into breathless silence. Caleb stepped out, each stride slow but resolute. The scrape of his braces against the floor echoed clearly, yet instead of shame it sounded like the beat of a drum, each note a declaration that this boy was defying fate. At first the audience was startled. A few glances of pity flickered, whispers stirred. Daniel heard every sound, piercing his skin like needles. He had dreaded this very moment, feared his son would be judged, deemed not enough. But then, the unexpected happened. Caleb reached out his hand, Aaliyah stepped in, and the dance began. She did not pull him, nor shield him. Aaliyah was simply there, a quiet current of music beneath his steps. Caleb turned slowly, his legs heavy, but each movement filled with resolve. The room seemed to hold its breath. Gradually, the murmurs faded, replaced by a silence so complete it could only exist when people witnessed something greater than entertainment, a journey of courage. Daniel felt his eyes grow hot. For years, he had believed he could protect Caleb by hiding him from the world, shielding him from cruel stares. But now, here on this stage, his son was not only standing, he was shining, in his own way. What Daniel could not give, Aaliyah had given. Something extraordinary rippled through the hall. When Caleb spun for the final time, the metal braces gleaming under the lights, the entire room erupted in applause. No pity remained, only admiration, recognition. Caleb bowed, breathing hard, his face alight with joy. Daniel saw that his son had just won the most important battle of his life, not against his physical limits, but against the fear in his heart. Aaliyah stepped back, leaving Caleb alone to receive the ovation. This was no longer her moment, nor Daniel's. It was the pure triumph of a child. Yet in the look she cast toward Daniel there was a silent message. You see, all he needed was a chance to believe in himself. While the audience rose to their feet, still clapping, Daniel quietly slipped away from his seat. He did not want anyone to see him trembling. Out in the empty hallway, he leaned against the wall and drew in a deep breath. Never in his life had he felt both so fragile and so strong. He knew, from that very moment, his life would never be the same. Would Daniel have the courage to take the next step, not only as a father, but as a man willing to open his heart to the woman who had changed everything? The morning after the performance, the city was as noisy as ever, but for Daniel, the first sound he heard was the echo of applause still beating in his chest. The rows of wooden seats, the old yellow lights, the scrape of Caleb's braces had turned into drumbeats, opening the way for a thought never fully formed before. It was time to stop shielding and start building. He did not mention money. He opened his calendar, saw the empty space in the afternoon, and drove straight to step forward, as if part of his heart already lived there. The practice room was quiet, mirrors reflecting thin streaks of sunlight. Aaliyah was already there, folding mats, marking chalk lines on the floor for the new group of children. Without many words, he joined her in cleaning, picking up old rolls of tape, adjusting the bass of a speaker. Amid these small, ordinary tasks, Daniel realized something boardrooms had never taught him: endurance without noise. He spoke little, but every precise movement felt like a silent thank you for the night before. News of the performance spread quickly. A local news site published a photo of Caleb bowing, with Aaliyah stepping back to give him the stage. Hundreds of comments poured in, both praise and skepticism. Some were moved, others doubted, calling it mere sentiment. Aaliyah read them all, closed her phone, and continued drawing chalk lines. Daniel saw this and understood. The next battlefield was not the stage, but public opinion. Bureaucracy, attendance sheets, and numbers demanded to measure what was never meant to be measured. He began to change the way he showed up. Instead of standing behind the door, Daniel sat with the parents on the sidelines, listening to their stories. A mother recounting her search for a prosthetic leg for her child. A father shyly showing a video of his daughter spinning her wheelchair for the first time. A girl with braces saying music helped her stand still longer. These seemingly small details taught him a new language, one that lay outside balance sheets. Caleb changed too. He no longer counted his steps in fear, but measured them with anticipation. Each time he looked up from the mirror, his gaze was not seeking his father's approval, but searching for ways to lead his friends through a short sequence. Daniel saw it clearly. Letting go of control did not make him less, but created space for his son to grow more. He began to take notes, not to dictate, but to understand what made his son pause, what made him laugh, what Aaliyah did that made the whole group breathe in sync. Then came the first call from a community foundation. They wanted a meeting, not because of Daniel's checkbook, but because of the neuromotor approach Step Forward was practicing. Aaliyah accepted the appointment with the calm of someone used to rejection. Daniel offered to prepare materials, goals, methods, number of children served, both qualitative and quantitative impacts. This time, his voice carried no command, only a proposal to support. Aaliyah nodded gently. She didn't need someone to speak for her. She needed someone to stand beside her when the questions poured in. The presentation took place in a borrowed meeting room at a district library. Plastic chairs, an old projector, a screen with a small scratch. Aaliyah spoke about the philosophy of child-led movement, about safe failures, about turning the sound of braces, often a source of discomfort, into rhythmic cues to help children's vestibular systems find balance again. Daniel did not interrupt. When it came time for data, he opened his laptop and presented briefly. Attendance, frequency, consistency of at-home practice, small but steady indicators of progress. No embellishment, no promotion, just facts standing next to the story, and for the first time he felt himself in the right place, supporting, not claiming. After the meeting, the foundation promised to consider a 6-month pilot grant. Aaliyah exhaled, not because of the money. The amount was modest, but because the door had cracked open. Daniel looked at the confirmation paper, understanding that long strides often began on narrow paths. He offered to contribute further, but this time not with a flashy check. Instead, he pledged legal support, auditing, and a team of volunteers from his company to repair the wooden floor and upgrade the electrical system. Aaliyah fell silent for a moment, then nodded. This was the kind of aid that kept a small program from collapsing under invisible leaks. By afternoon, class resumed. A new song played, slower, deeper. Caleb stepped into the circle, took a deep breath, and raised his hand in signal. His friends followed, not in perfect unison, but with excitement. Aaliyah stepped back, her hand resting on the edge of the mirror as if marking a boundary. Today, the leaders were the children. Daniel leaned against the doorway, realizing his own breathing had synced with the rhythm of the room. For the first time, he did not think of what came next as a plan. He thought of it as a promise. When class ended, a light rain fell. Puddles spread across the front yard, reflecting the trembling "step forward" sign in the wind. Daniel picked up an old umbrella by the door and held it out to Aaliyah. She took it without ceremony, as if they had already shared much more than just a rain shower. Caleb jogged slowly across the puddles, his braces splashing up tiny sprays of water, laughing like a child in the truest sense. In that moment, Daniel understood. What he was building was not a grand center, nor a story for the press to tell. It was a new habit showing up, stepping back, and believing. That night, he sat at the kitchen table and unfolded the very first step forward card Aaliyah had left on his desk. Its edges were worn, the turquoise color slightly faded. Beside it, he placed a blank sheet of paper and wrote neatly, "We need a lasting home for this rhythm." Underneath, he listed 3 bullet points: secure a long-term space, create a scholarship fund, train future instructors. It was not a conquest plan, but a pledge of companionship. He smiled, folded it, and slipped it into an envelope labeled, "For A, tomorrow." In that final moment, the story of Lucas, Richard, and Diana was no longer just about a dance in a restaurant, but had become a symbol of something deeper: the power of courage, of taking someone's hand when they are trembling the most. We come to realize that sometimes the greatest changes do not arise from power or wealth, but from a single act of warmth, a choice not to turn away. The lesson here is simple yet powerful. Love and empathy can erase the divides of wealth, status, or skin color. When we open our hearts to truly see one another as human, we not only give hope to others, but also heal ourselves. Thank you to our audience in the United States for walking with us through this story. If it touched your heart, leave a comment right now. What part of this story will you never forget? Share this video with your friends, so that the message of trust and connection can travel even further. And don't forget to subscribe to the channel so you won't miss the next chapter, because who knows, the next story might just be your own.